Michel Foucault's The History of Sexuality. Michel Foucault's work, The History of Sexuality, is a fascinating exploration of how sexuality is not just a biological reality but also a social and cultural construct. Foucault argues that the way societies think about and regulate sexuality has changed over time, and he challenges many of the ideas people take for granted. He does not see sexuality as something purely natural. Instead, he believes it is shaped by history, politics, and power. This makes his work both complex and incredibly insightful. Foucault begins by debunking what he calls the repressive hypothesis. This is the idea that society has always tried to suppress sexuality, particularly from the 17th century onward. Many people believe that before modern times, people were freer and more open about sex, but Foucault questions this view. He argues that even when societies seem to be repressive, they are still very focused on sexuality. In fact, talking about repression is itself a way of talking about sex, and this has given sex a central place in modern culture. One of Foucault's key points is that power and sexuality are deeply connected. He challenges the idea that power is always something that comes from the top down, like from a king or government. Instead, he sees power as something that is spread throughout society. Power is not just about laws and rules, it is also about how people behave, think, and talk. When it comes to sexuality, power works in subtle ways. It influences what people see as normal or abnormal, acceptable or unacceptable. For instance, scientific studies, religious teachings, and social norms all shape how people think about sex, and these ideas are often internalized by individuals. Foucault also introduces the concept of a biopower, which refers to the way modern societies regulate people's lives, bodies, and health. In earlier times, power was often about taking life or letting people die, like in wars or executions. But in modern times, power is more about managing life. Governments, schools, and medical institutions focus on things like birth rates, healthcare, and personal behavior. Sexuality is a big part of this because it connects to issues like reproduction, family structure, and morality. For example, debates about contraception, abortion, or same-sex relationships are all examples of how biopower works in the modern world. Another major idea in The History of Sexuality is that talking about sexuality has become a way of exerting control. Foucault points out that in the 19th century, there was an explosion of discourse about sex. Scientists, doctors, and psychologists began studying it intensely, creating new categories like heterosexual and homosexual. These terms were not just descriptive, they were also ways of labeling people, which had real consequences. Once someone was labeled as a deviant, they could be treated differently or excluded from society. Foucault shows how this process of categorization is a form of power. Interestingly, Foucault does not think this focus on sexuality is entirely negative. While it can be a way of controlling people, it also creates opportunities for resistance. If power is everywhere, then resistance can also be everywhere. People can challenge the ways society tries to define and regulate them. For example, modern movements for LGBTQ+ rights challenge traditional ideas about sexuality and fight for a more inclusive society. Foucault also emphasizes that sexuality is not a universal concept. It changes across different times and places. What is considered normal or taboo in one society might be completely different in another. By studying the history of sexuality, Foucault encourages us to question our own assumptions and see how our ideas are shaped by culture and history. Overall, The History of Sexuality is not just a book about sex, it is a book about power, society, and identity. Foucault shows that sexuality is much more than a private matter. It is deeply connected to politics, culture, and the way people understand themselves. His work encourages us to think critically about the world we live in and to see how things we take for granted might actually be shaped by forces we do not always notice. If you found this explanation interesting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Your support helps us bring these complex ideas to life in a way that is easy to understand. Thank you for watching.